As a fan, my favorite dream began deep within my soul. But my dream, it became reality when I met the king. Thank you. Now, the first time that I met Elvis was at one of his concerts in Detroit. It was in 1973. And my wife, Carolyn, had gotten us tickets as a surprise birthday present for me because she knew what a big Elvis fan that I was. And I still am. And we had wonderful seats on that very front row. Now, as many of you may know, Elvis had a tradition when he was performing of walking the stage, and he would randomly hand out scarves to the ladies as they would approach the stage. Well, that night, during one of his songs, he looked directly at my wife, Carolyn, and he motioned for her to come up to the stage. Well, she ignored him. And he motioned again. Well, Carolyn looked over at me, she looked back at Elvis, and she looked back over at me, and she said, "George, what do you think I should do?" I said, "Carolyn, I think you should go up there. Because if you don't, I am." Well, reluctantly, she got up, she walked up to the stage. Elvis came right over to her. He got down on one knee, he took a scarf, put it around her neck, he kissed her on the cheek, and then he whispered in her ear. But when she turned around to come back to sit down, she had a glow on her face that I had never seen before. I was mesmerized by it. And in fact, the song that Elvis was singing was Sweet Caroline. She came down and she sat down next to me, never said a word. A few minutes later, I leaned over and I said, "Carolyn, what did Elvis whisper in your ear?" She looked at me with a beautiful smile. She winked. She put this index finger up to her lips for me to be quiet. And we continued to watch the concert. And when the show ended and we were about to leave, one of Elvis' bodyguards walked up to Carolyn. And he said, "Pardon me, miss." He said, "Elvis, he'd like to meet you." Carolyn was somewhat startled. She said, "Beg your pardon?" He said, "Elvis, he wants to meet you. He wants you to come backstage." She stood there for a minute. She said, "Well, I'm here with my husband." Well, he looked over at me, had a frown on his face, and shrugged his shoulders. And he said, "All right, I guess you can come too." So anyway, we went backstage, and needless to say, Elvis looked surprised. But he was very cordial. And I think that he must have thought that Carolyn was there alone. Well, they began to talk, and they must have talked for a good 10, 15 minutes. And he told Carolyn that when he looked out into that audience and he spotted her face, that he just needed a familiar face to talk with because she reminded him of his wife, Priscilla. Well, when they finished talking, Elvis and I began to talk, and I was amazed at how much that we had in common. We were both truck drivers at one time. We both worked for an electrical contractor at one time. We were both in the Army. We were both in tank units. We were both discharged as sergeants. And we both loved fried peanut butter and banana sandwiches. But when we finished talking, Elvis said, "George, I'd like you to give me a phone number because I'm going to call you sometime, and I want you and Caroline to come to Graceland as my guest." Now he's calling Carolyn, now he's calling Caroline. I gave him the phone number, we said goodbye, and we left. And as we're driving home, after such a remarkable evening, which we discussed, I said, Carolyn, tell me something. What did Elvis whisper in your ear? And that's when she told me, George, that is between Elvis and me. That was our secret. Well, as time passed, from time to time, I'd ask her the same question. What Elvis whispered in her ear? And I'd always get the same answer between she and Elvis. Well, it must have been a good year later. I get a phone call. I said, hello? George? I said, yes. He said, this is Elvis. I said, pardon me? He said, this is Elvis. He said, you remember we met at one of my concerts? I said, yes, I do. He said, you remember I told you I was going to have you and Caroline as my guest at Graceland? I said, yes, I do. He said, well, this is the invite. I said, okay, when? He said, I'm going to have my plane at your airport tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. Can you make it? What am I going to say? No. I said, yes, yes. He said, by the way, that's Caroline. I said, she's fine. He hung up. Well, I quickly called Caroline, gave her the details, and she said, George, you do realize that we have 3 children, right? And we do have to have a sitter, and I need clothes. I said, honey, it's only going to be one night. So I convinced her. Next morning at 9 a.m., we arrive at the airport. We're in the private plane area. 9 o'clock, we'll come to the Learjet. On the fuselage of that, the tail section of that plane is the Elvis logo, that lightning bolt, and the letters TCB, taking care of business. On the fuselage is painted the name Lisa Marie, which is his daughter. We were escorted out there. The pilots opened the door, got a red carpet. We get on that Learjet. Less than 3 hours later, we're sitting in Memphis, Tennessee, in Graceland, having lunch. Not only did we see Elvis again, his family, and his wife Priscilla, a lot of his entourage, and we even sat in on a recording session in the jungle room. And that's when Elvis made the announcement. Just want to remind everybody that we're opening up tonight in Vegas. Some of the guys have already gone out there, and they looked over and he said, George, and I want you and Caroline going along with us as our guests, and I'll still have you home tomorrow. Good gracious. This happened so quick. We head out to Vegas. He made arrangements for us at the hotel, which was the International Hilton, had us a suite. He provided VIP tickets for Carolyn to sit with his wife Priscilla and their guests at the concert. And he told me that he was going to put me in a white jumpsuit. And I was going to be on stage handing him his scarves. My dream come true. I'm going to be on stage with the king. Well, when the concert ended, we went back to Elvis' hospitality suite. And I got to tell you, we met more celebrities than you could meet in a lifetime. And I guess we were there for about 2 hours, and Carol and I said our goodbyes, went back to our room. In fact, that was the last time I ever heard or saw Elvis again. Get a call about 10 o'clock that morning from the front desk. Mr. Bennis, yes, front desk called me. We have a limousine here to take you and Mrs. Bennis to the airport. Okay. Go down, get in the airport, get in the car, go to the airport, get on the plane, fly back to Michigan. And I'm telling you, it was like a whirlwind. It happened so fast. Well, over the next few years, from time to time, I would ask Carolyn again, what Elvis was doing here, and I'd always get the same darn response. But one night, after an overindulgence of cocktails, and we were preparing for bed, Carolyn looked at me and said, George, she said, I think it's time. I said, pardon me? She said, I think it's time. Well, I looked by then, Carolyn was dressed in this slinky, negligee. And I said, Carolyn, I think it's time to. She said, no. She said, I think it's time that I told you what Elvis whispered in my ear. Well, by then it had been so long, I wasn't really sure that I wanted to know. But she said, no, come over and sit next to me here on the bed. I went over and sat down next to her. She snuggled up next to me. She put her arm around my neck. She kissed me on the cheek. She put those beautiful lips up to my ear. And just as she was about to speak, I woke up.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, Elvis has left the building.